The arrogant defense attorney walks into the courthouse expecting an easy victory, but when he spots a black woman in the hallway and assumes she's just another public defender, he makes the mistake of his career. His condescending remarks about how some people don't belong in real courtrooms and his dismissive attitude toward her legal knowledge would have been bad enough. But when the bailiff announces "All rise for the Honorable Judge Williams," and she walks to the bench in her black robes, this lawyer realizes he just insulted the federal judge who will decide his client's fate and his own professional future. It was a crisp Thursday morning in October when attorney Marcus Sterling adjusted his expensive Italian silk tie and strode confidently through the marble halls of the Federal District Courthouse in downtown Atlanta. At 45, Marcus had built his reputation as one of the city's most successful criminal defense attorneys, known for his sharp suits, sharper tongue, and an unshakable belief that he was the smartest person in any room he entered. His polished Oxford shoes clicked authoritatively against the marble floors as he made his way toward courtroom 4B, where he was scheduled to argue what he considered a routine motion hearing. The case was straightforward in his mind: a wealthy businessman accused of financial fraud, the kind of white-collar crime that Marcus Potterest in defending. He had handled hundreds of similar cases, and he expected today to be no different. A few legal maneuvers, some procedural arguments, and a favorable ruling that would set the stage for an eventual plea bargain or dismissal. Marcus carried himself with the swagger of someone who had never lost a case he truly cared about winning. His salt-and-pepper hair was perfectly styled, his charcoal gray suit was tailored to perfection, and his briefcase, genuine Italian leather worth more than most people's monthly salary, swung casually at his side. He was exactly the kind of lawyer who inspired both admiration and resentment in equal measure, depending on which side of the courtroom you found yourself. As he rounded the corner toward the courtroom, Marcus noticed a black woman standing near the tall windows that overlooked the city skyline. She appeared to be in her early 40s, dressed professionally in a navy blue blazer and matching skirt, with her hair pulled back in a neat bun. She was holding a manila folder and seemed to be reviewing some documents, occasionally glancing up at the morning sunlight streaming through the windows. Marcus's first assumption was automatic and dismissive. She must be a public defender, probably overworked and underpaid like the rest of them, trying to prepare for whatever hopeless case she'd been assigned. Public defenders were a necessary part of the system, he supposed, but they were hardly in the same league as private attorneys like himself. They handled the cases that nobody wanted, defended the clients who couldn't afford real legal representation, and generally served as a speed bump in the efficient administration of justice. The woman looked up as Marcus approached, offering a polite nod that he barely acknowledged. Instead, Marcus saw an opportunity to demonstrate his superior knowledge and experience, perhaps even network a little bit with someone who might send him referrals in the future. "Morning," Marcus said, his tone carrying the casual condescension of someone speaking to a subordinate. "You look a little lost. First time in federal court?" Judge Patricia Williams, though Marcus had no idea who she was, looked up from her documents with a carefully neutral expression. She had been appointed to the federal bench just 6 months earlier, making her the youngest African-American woman to serve as a district judge in Georgia's history. She was brilliant, having graduated summa cum laude from Yale Law School and spent 15 years as a prosecutor before being nominated by the president and confirmed by the Senate. But she was also keenly aware that her every move was scrutinized, every decision questioned, and every interaction viewed through the lens of both her race and her gender. "Good morning," she replied calmly, her voice carrying the measured tone of someone accustomed to choosing their words carefully. "Just reviewing some materials before court convenes." Marcus glanced at the folder in her hands and chuckled slightly. "Let me guess. Court-appointed case. Probably your first federal matter." He shook his head with the kind of patronizing smile that suggested he was about to do her an enormous favor. "Word of advice. Federal court is a whole different ballgame from whatever municipal or county work you're used to. The judges here don't have patience for amateur hour." Judge Williams raised an eyebrow slightly but said nothing, allowing Marcus to continue digging his own professional grave. "The thing about federal court," Marcus continued, warming to his subject and clearly enjoying the opportunity to lecture someone he viewed as his intellectual inferior, is that it requires a certain level of sophistication. The legal arguments are more complex, the procedures are more rigorous, and frankly the expectations are much higher. It's not like traffic court or domestic relations where you can just wing it and hope for the best. The judge's expression remained politely neutral, though anyone who knew her well would have recognized the slight tightening around her eyes that indicated her patience was being tested. "I see," she said simply. "And what type of case brings you here today?" Marcus straightened up, clearly pleased to have been asked about his own legal prowess. "Corporate fraud defense. High-profile client, complex financial instruments, multiple federal agencies involved. The kind of case that requires someone with real experience and expertise." He gestured dismissively toward her folder. "No offense, but it's probably a bit more sophisticated than whatever you're handling." Judge Williams nodded slowly, as if considering his words. "Corporate fraud can indeed be complex. Are you familiar with the precedent set in United States Carpenter regarding the application of federal wire fraud statutes to corporate executives?" Marcus blinked, momentarily thrown off by the specificity of her question. He recognized the case name. It was a landmark Supreme Court decision from several decades earlier, but he couldn't immediately recall the specific details or how it might apply to his current case. "Well, yes, of course," he said, though his tone suggested he was less certain than he appeared. "Though I'm not sure that particular precedent is relevant to most public defender cases." "Actually," Judge Williams said, her voice remaining perfectly calm and professional, "Carpenter established some important principles about intent and knowledge requirements that apply broadly across federal criminal law, including many cases that might come before a public defender." Marcus felt a flash of irritation. He didn't appreciate being corrected, especially not by someone he assumed was beneath his professional level. "Look," he said, his tone becoming sharper and more dismissive, "I don't mean to be rude, but some people just aren't cut out for this level of legal practice. Federal court isn't a place to learn on the job or try to prove yourself. Maybe you should consider sticking to the types of cases that are more appropriate for your background." The words hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that neither needed to have spelled out explicitly. Judge Williams felt the familiar sting of assumptions made about her competence based on her appearance, assumptions she had been fighting her entire legal career. "And what background would that be?" she asked quietly, her voice still controlled but with an edge that Marcus was too arrogant to notice. "Come on," Marcus said with a laugh that was equal parts condescending and dismissive. "We both know how this works. There are certain expectations in federal court, certain standards that have to be maintained. Some people belong in these courtrooms, and others, well, others should probably know their limitation." He glanced at his expensive watch, a Rolex that he made sure was always visible during his gestures. "I don't mean to sound harsh, but honestly, seeing someone like you in federal court just seems like a waste of everyone's time. These cases require a level of sophistication and experience that you probably haven't had the opportunity to develop." Judge Williams looked at him steadily, her dark eyes betraying nothing of what she was thinking. "Someone like me." Marcus waved his hand dismissively, as if the answer should be obvious. "You know what I mean. This isn't about being politically correct or anything like that. It's just reality. Federal court is where the serious lawyers handle serious cases. It's not a place for diversity hires or people trying to make some kind of statement." The judge's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but her voice remained level. "I see. And what kind of statement do you think I might be trying to make?" "Look, I'm sure you're perfectly competent at what you do," Marcus continued, completely oblivious to the fact that he was systematically destroying his own career with every word. "But there's a difference between handling routine criminal defense and operating at this level. Maybe you'd be more comfortable in state court. Or better yet, maybe consider civil cases or family law. Something more suited to your background." Judge Williams set down her folder carefully, her movements deliberate and controlled. "Mr. Sterling, Marcus Sterling of Sterling, Whitman and Associates." He said his name with the kind of pride reserved for someone who believed his reputation preceded him. "Mr. Sterling," Judge Williams said, her voice taking on a quality that any experienced lawyer would have recognized as dangerous. "I appreciate your concern for my professional development. It's so thoughtful of you to take time out of your busy schedule to educate someone you perceive as being out of her depth. Marcus missed the sarcasm entirely, interpreting her words as genuine gratitude. Well, we all started somewhere. The important thing is knowing when you're in over your head. Indeed, the judge replied. And speaking of being in over one's head, what courtroom are you appearing in today? 4B. Judge Williams is hearing motions this morning. Probably some liberal Obama appointee who doesn't understand business or economics, but I've handled worse. Marcus checked his watch again. Actually, I should probably head in soon. These federal judges don't like to be kept waiting, even if they don't know what they're doing. Judge Williams smiled for the first time during their conversation, though it wasn't a warm expression. How interesting. I hope you have an enlightening experience in Judge Williams' courtroom. Oh, I'm sure it'll be fine, Marcus said with characteristic arrogance. Most of these appointed judges are all talk anyway. Once they see a real lawyer in action, they usually defer to experience. He started to walk toward the courtroom, then paused and turned back to the judge. Good luck with whatever you're doing, and remember what I said about knowing your place. It'll save you a lot of embarrassment down the road. With that parting shot, Marcus Sterling strode confidently toward courtroom 4B, completely unaware that he had just spent the last 10 minutes systematically insulting the federal judge who would be presiding over his case in approximately 15 minutes. Judge Williams watched him go, her expression unreadable. She had encountered attorneys like Marcus Sterling throughout her career, men who assumed that their success gave them the right to diminish others, who confused confidence with competence, and who believed that courtroom victories made them superior to everyone around them. She picked up her folder and made her way toward the judge's private entrance to courtroom 4B. In 15 minutes, Marcus Sterling was going to learn a lesson about assumptions, respect, and the price of arrogance. It wasn't a lesson she particularly enjoyed teaching, but it was one that was clearly necessary. As she walked through the door marked "Judges Only," Judge Williams reflected on the conversation she had just endured. She had given Marcus every opportunity to recognize his mistake, to show some basic professional courtesy, or to simply stop talking before he made things worse for himself. Instead, he had doubled down on his assumptions and his prejudices, making it clear that he viewed her presence in the courthouse as some kind of affirmative action charity case. Well, he was about to discover exactly how wrong he was. Marcus Sterling entered courtroom 4B with his characteristic swagger, nodding to the court reporter and scanning the room with the confidence of someone who owned the space. The courtroom was impressive, with high ceilings, dark wood paneling, and the kind of formal atmosphere that reminded everyone present of the gravity of federal judicial proceedings. His client, Robert Whitman, was already seated at the defense table. Whitman was a portly man in his 60s, a real estate developer accused of defrauding investors out of millions of dollars through a series of complex shell companies and fraudulent loan applications. He was exactly the kind of client Marcus preferred: wealthy, connected, and able to pay substantial legal fees regardless of the outcome. "How are we looking?" Whitman whispered, as Marcus took his seat. "Excellent," Marcus replied confidently. "I did some research on this Judge Williams. Young appointment, probably inexperienced. Definitely someone we can work with. This should be straightforward." The prosecutor, a serious-looking woman in her 30s named Assistant U.S. Attorney Sarah Chen, was already seated at the government's table, reviewing her notes. Marcus had faced her before and found her competent but unremarkable, the kind of career prosecutor who played by the rules and rarely took risks. "All rise," the bailiff announced suddenly, his voice echoing through the courtroom. "The United States District Court for the Northern District of Georgia is now in session, the Honorable Patricia Williams presiding." Marcus stood along with everyone else in the courtroom, expecting to see some nervous young judge making her way to the bench. Instead, he watched in growing horror as the same black woman he had just finished lecturing in the hallway emerged from the judge's chambers, now wearing the black robes of a federal judge. The blood drained from Marcus's face as Judge Williams took her seat at the bench, her expression perfectly composed and professional. She looked out over the courtroom with the authority that came with her position, her gaze eventually settling on Marcus with the barest hint of recognition. "Please be seated." Judge Williams said, her voice carrying clearly through the courtroom. "We are here today for a motion hearing in the case of United States buyer Robert Whitman. Will counsel please state their appearances for the record?" Sarah Chen stood first. Sarah Chen, Assistant United States Attorney, appearing on behalf of the United States. Marcus remained seated for a moment longer than necessary, his mind racing as he tried to process the situation he had just walked into. When the silence stretched uncomfortably long, Judge Williams looked directly at him. Counsel for the defendant, Marcus slowly stood, his legs feeling unsteady beneath him. Marcus Sterling of Sterling, Whitman and Associates, representing the defendant Robert Whitman, Your Honor. Judge Williams nodded formally. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling. Before we proceed with today's motion, I want to address the professional standards expected in this courtroom. All attorneys appearing before this court are expected to conduct themselves with dignity, respect, and professional courtesy, not only during proceedings, but in all interactions within this courthouse." Marcus felt sweat beginning to form on his forehead despite the cool temperature in the courtroom. He was beginning to realize that his earlier conversation had not gone unnoticed or forgotten. Furthermore, Judge Williams continued, her eyes never leaving Marcus's face, "This court operates on the principle that all individuals, regardless of their background, appearance, or perceived experience level, deserve to be treated with basic human dignity and professional respect. Any attorney who demonstrates an inability to uphold these standards calls into question their fitness to practice law in this jurisdiction." The courtroom was completely silent except for the soft scratching of the court reporter's fingers on her stenotype machine. Marcus could feel the eyes of everyone present, the prosecutor, his client, the court staff, and the few spectators in the gallery, watching his obvious discomfort. "Now then," Judge Williams said, settling back in her chair with the composed authority of someone completely in control of the situation, "I understand there are several pre-trial motions to be heard today. Mr. Sterling, please proceed with your first motion." Marcus looked down at his notes, but the words seemed to swim on the page. Everything he had prepared, every argument he had planned to make, suddenly felt inadequate in the face of what he had done. He cleared his throat and attempted to regain his composure. "Your Honor, the defense respectfully moves to dismiss the charges against Mr. Whitman on the grounds that the government's evidence is insufficient to support the allegations and that certain evidence was obtained in violation of my client's Fourth Amendment rights." Judge Williams listened patiently as Marcus presented his arguments, though they came out stilted and uncertain, lacking the smooth confidence he usually displayed in court. When he finished, she turned to the prosecutor. "Ms. Chen, the government's Sarah Chen stood and began methodically dismantling Marcus's arguments, citing relevant case law and legal precedents with the kind of preparation and precision that Marcus usually prided himself on. As she spoke, Marcus realized that she was referencing several of the same cases that Judge Williams had mentioned during their hallway conversation, cases that Marcus had dismissed as irrelevant to real legal practice. When both attorneys had finished their presentations, Judge Williams leaned forward slightly, her hands folded in front of her. "Mr. Sterling, I'm curious about your interpretation of United States v. Carpenter, which you cited in your brief. Could you elaborate on how you believe that precedent applies to your client's situation?" Marcus felt his throat go dry. This was the same case the judge had asked him about in the hallway, the one he had brushed off as irrelevant to his sophisticated practice. Now, in front of a courtroom full of people, he was being asked to demonstrate the legal knowledge he had claimed to possess. "Well, Your Honor," Marcus began, stalling for time while his mind raced. "Carpenter established, that is to say, the court held." He trailed off, realizing that he couldn't remember the specific holding of the case or how it might apply to his client's situation. In the hallway, he could bluff his way through the conversation. In a courtroom, under the scrutiny of a federal judge, his ignorance was impossible to hide. Judge Williams waited patiently for him to continue, her expression giving nothing away. When it became clear that Marcus had no substantive response, she spoke. "Ms. Sterling, Carpenter established that federal wire fraud statutes require proof of intent to deceive, not merely intent to deprive someone of property. The case specifically addressed situations where corporate executives claimed they believed their actions were legal, even if those actions ultimately harmed investors. Given that your client's defense appears to rest on his claim that he believed his loan applications were accurate, I would think Carpenter would be central to your legal strategy. The explanation was delivered in the same calm, professional tone that Judge Williams had used in the hallway when Marcus had dismissed her legal knowledge as inadequate for real courtroom work. Now, however, the context made clear exactly how foolish his assumptions had been. "Of course, Your Honor," Marcus managed to say, though his voice lacked conviction. That's exactly the precedent I was referring to." "I'm sure it was," Judge Williams replied, and though her tone remained perfectly professional, Marcus detected just the slightest hint of sarcasm. The hearing continued for another hour, with Marcus struggling to regain his footing, while Judge Williams systematically demonstrated the kind of legal knowledge and courtroom mastery that Marcus had assumed she couldn't possess. Every question she asked revealed the depth of her understanding. Every ruling she made showed the careful consideration of someone who truly understood the law. When the hearing finally concluded, Judge Williams had denied most of Marcus's motions, though she had done so with careful legal reasoning that would be difficult to challenge on appeal. As she prepared to leave the bench, she looked directly at Marcus one final time. "Mr. Sterling, a word of advice based on my years of experience in federal court. The practice of law is not about demonstrating superiority over one's colleagues or making assumptions about their capabilities. It's about serving clients effectively and upholding the principles of justice. I trust you'll keep that in mind in future appearances before this court." With that, she stood and disappeared into her chambers, leaving Marcus to contemplate the wreckage of what had once been his unshakable professional confidence. As the courtroom emptied, Marcus's client leaned over to whisper urgently in his ear. "What the hell was that about? It sounded like she was lecturing you personally." Marcus loosened his tie, suddenly feeling like it was choking him. "It's complicated." "Complicated how? You know her? Have you appeared before her before?" Marcus closed his briefcase with shaking hands. "We met earlier, before court." And Marcus looked toward the door through which Judge Williams had disappeared, realizing that word of his professional humiliation would likely spread throughout the legal community before the day was over. Federal judges talked to each other, court reporters gossiped, and attorneys loved nothing more than a good story about someone else's downfall. Let's just say I made some assumptions that turned out to be incorrect. As Marcus left the courthouse that day, his expensive shoes clicking against the same marble floors he had walked with such confidence just hours earlier, he knew that his reputation would never fully recover. In a profession where respect and credibility were everything, he had demonstrated spectacular arrogance and ignorance in front of exactly the wrong person. But perhaps most importantly, he had learned a lesson that should have been obvious from the beginning. Never assume you know someone's capabilities based on their appearance, and never underestimate the person you're talking to, because you never know when that person might turn out to be the judge who holds your professional future in their hands. Judge Williams, meanwhile, returned to her chambers and reflected on the morning's events. She took no pleasure in Marcus Sterling's humiliation, but she hoped that the lesson would serve not just him, but any other attorney who might be tempted to make similar assumptions in the future. Because in her courtroom, respect was not optional, competence was not determined by appearance, and everyone, regardless of their background, deserved to be treated with dignity. That was not just the law. That was just